The world bled crimson and gold as the sun dipped below the vast shimmering expanse of the Pacific, painting the Marina del Rey harbor in strokes of fiery, impossible beauty. The tranquil rhythm of waves lapping against hulls, the distant muffled laughter from a seaside restaurant, the gentle clink of tools from a nearby boat repair shop. It was a symphony of California serenity. Then, an apocalyptic roar tore through the peace, ripping the air itself, a sound that swallowed all others. A blinding flash erupted from the water, followed by a shockwave that rattled windows in distant condos and sent flocks of startled birds screaming into the now shattered sky. Two majestic mega-yachts, the Odyssey and the Serenity, vessels that had glided with imperious grace just moments before, became instant infernos, colossal torches against the twilight. Plumes of thick, oily black smoke billowed upwards, staining the vibrant canvas of the sunset, turning orange and purple into a grotesque charcoal grey. The heat was a tangible, living thing, radiating outwards, pressing against the skin even from a distance. A monstrous breath exhaled by the burning behemoths. Ethan Thorne, a man whose hands knew the honest grit of grease and fiberglass, felt the concussive force punch him in the chest. He was crouched beside a half-dismantled outboard motor, a wrench clutched in a calloused fist, the scent of salt water and engine oil a familiar comfort. His mid-30s sat heavy on him, etched into the lines around eyes that held the ghosts of forgotten battles fought on distant scorching sands and in the chilling depths of the ocean. He moved through life with the quiet diligence of a craftsman, finding a semblance of peace in the rhythmic clang of wrenches and the solitude of his small, nondescript shop, a haven from a past that refused to fade. Once, he had been a decorated Navy SEAL, a man forged in the crucible of impossible missions, but a sudden, tragic mission gone wrong had cost him everything: his squad, his sense of purpose, and ultimately, his family. Now he kept to himself, seeking solace in the honest work and the vast, indifferent ocean that offered a mirror to his own quiet depths. A tarnished silver compass charm, worn smooth from years of touching, hung around his neck, a silent testament to paths taken and lost, a constant heavy reminder of directions no longer clear. The explosion snapped him out of his quiet reverie with the brutal efficiency of a tripwire. Old instincts, buried deep beneath layers of self-imposed calm, ignited. There was no thought, no hesitation, only reaction. He dropped the wrench with a clatter that was swallowed by the escalating screams of sirens and onlookers. Without a second's pause, he vaulted over a stack of old tires, his gaze already locked on the two burning hulks. His battered skiff, a modest vessel he usually reserved for solitary fishing trips or hauling smaller craft, was tied to his rickety dock. He untied it in one fluid motion, a practiced dexterity that spoke of countless hours spent on the water, both in peace and in war. The small engine sputtered to life with a familiar grumble, a comforting sound amidst the growing chaos. He shoved off, cutting through the panicked cries of the swelling crowd that gathered on the shore, their faces illuminated by the inferno's terrifying glow. The air grew thick with smoke, acrid and biting, stinging his eyes and catching in his throat. The heat became an oppressive blanket, searing his skin, clinging to his clothes. He navigated the treacherous flaming debris field, a shifting seascape of burning planks, shattered glass, and unidentifiable wreckage. Each ripple on the water reflected the orange and red conflagration, turning the harbor into a terrifying mirror of hell. He pushed the skiff harder, the small engine straining, a desperate, defiant protest against the overwhelming force of the fire. His eyes, now narrowed and sharp, scanned the water, searching for any sign of life, any movement in the churning, fiery darkness. He was no longer Ethan Thorne, the quiet mechanic. He was a SEAL again, driven by a primal urge to protect, to save, to undo a past where he had failed. The weight of that past settled on his shoulders, a familiar companion in the face of imminent danger. The roaring flames mirrored the fire that now burned in his own determined eyes, a fire he thought long extinguished, a resolve he believed was buried under years of grief and quiet resignation. Then he saw her, a pale figure amidst the flickering, hellish light, drifting in the water, perilously close to the Odyssey's burning wreckage. She was unconscious, her simple white dress clinging to her, soaked and translucent, a stark ethereal contrast to the inferno raging behind them. Her dark hair fanned out around her head, a morbid halo in the oily water. He reached out, pulling her into the skiff with a strength that surprised even himself, cradling her in his arms. She was Olivia Reed, the family heiress, a name whispered in hushed tones in the city's highest echelons, known more for her meticulous control of her family's sprawling tech empire than for any outward vulnerability. In that moment, however, she was simply a woman, fragile and teetering on the precipice between life and death. Her life flickered precariously, a tiny flame against the raging fire, and Ethan felt an unexpected surge of responsibility, a connection he hadn't sought but couldn't deny. He turned the skiff, fighting against the current and the debris, heading back towards the distant flashing lights of emergency services that had finally begun to converge on the scene. He knew he couldn't simply hand her over. There was something unsettling about the scale of this disaster, a whisper of wrongness in the wind. Days later, Olivia awoke to a silence that was jarringly profound. The insistent throb behind her temples was a dull echo of a memory she couldn't quite grasp, a frantic argument with her father, Richard Reed, the formidable patriarch of Reed Technologies, just hours before the explosion. She lay on a soft, unfamiliar bed, the room around her discreet, nondescript, far from the opulent suites she was accustomed to. This was a safe house, Ethan had explained, arranged in a quiet neighborhood in Santa Monica, a world away from the smoldering ruins of her family's legacy. Her disorientation was profound, a thick fog coating her mind, obscuring the event itself. Amnesia. She could recall faces, facts, the intricate details of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but the fiery maw that had swallowed her family's yachts remained a void. Ethan, a man who had sworn off grand heroics after his past failures, found himself unexpectedly drawn into her desperate plight. He watched her from a distance, observing the subtle shifts in her expression, the way her brow furrowed in concentration when she tried to recall details, the flash of a vulnerable fear in her eyes that contradicted the media's portrayal of a cold, calculating heiress. He recognized instead a deeply vulnerable woman, trapped in a deadly, incomprehensible game, a pawn in a larger, darker scheme. His past as a SEAL had taught him to read people, to sense the undercurrents beneath the surface, and Olivia Reed, despite her initial guardedness and defensive posture, was a raw nerve exposed. He cooked simple meals, ensured her comfort, and spoke only when necessary, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that somehow put her at ease. The news reports accessed discreetly from a small, outdated television painted a tidy, reassuring picture, a swift, conclusive investigation by local authorities, citing an accidental fuel leak as the cause of the inferno, a tragic but isolated incident. Yet something in Ethan's gut twisted, a familiar knot of unease. Accidental. The speed with which the investigation was closed, the neatness of the explanation, it all felt wrong. He began to notice chilling inconsistencies, the kind that spoke volumes to a man trained to see what others missed. The initial reports mentioned strangely absent security footage from the crucial hours leading up to the explosion. No surveillance from the dock, no recordings from the yachts themselves, which should have been state-of-the-art. It was as if a critical window of time had been erased. Then there were the peculiar burn patterns on the Odyssey, described briefly in a leaked preliminary report, patterns that suggested an accelerant, something far more deliberate than a simple fuel leak, and most unsettling of all, the baffling, sudden disappearance of several key crew members. Not all of them, but a select few, including the head of security, a man named Bartholomew Barty Hayes, known for his unwavering loyalty to Richard Reed. He hadn't been found among the bodies, nor had he surfaced in any hospitals. He had simply vanished. Olivia, initially guarded and defensive, slowly began to lower her walls. The enforced intimacy of the safe house, the quiet vigilance of Ethan, the shared burden of her lost memory and his mounting suspicions, chipped away at her carefully constructed facade. She began to trust him, to confide in him. She spoke of the immense suffocating pressure of her family's tech empire, a colossal entity that had been her entire world since childhood. She described a labyrinthine business built upon generations of ruthless deals, hidden truths, and shadowy connections that stretched into every corner of the global economy. Her father, Richard Reed, had always been a man of iron will and unyielding ambition, but lately he had seemed more stressed, more distant. She confessed that he had been deeply entangled in a controversial high-stakes defense contract, a project that had been on the very verge of collapsing. The failure of this contract, she explained, threatened to expose decades of corporate malfeasance, a web of shady dealings and ethically dubious practices that had quietly fueled the Reed Empire's growth. She couldn't remember why they argued, but the tension in their last conversation was palpable, thick with unspoken accusations and desperate warnings. The pieces, disjointed as they were, began to coalesce into a disturbing picture. The accidental fuel leak felt less like a plausible explanation and more like a carefully constructed smokescreen. The missing footage, the peculiar burn patterns, the vanishing security chief, and Olivia's fragmented memory of a heated argument concerning a high-stakes contract threatening to expose corporate secrets. It was too much to be mere coincidence. The fire, Ethan realized with a chilling certainty, was no accident. It was an act, a meticulously planned, devastating act of sabotage. But who was behind it? And what were they trying to bury beneath the ashes of the Reed family's legacy? The question hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud gathering over their fragile sanctuary, promising a storm far more dangerous than any fire. They were stepping into a world of hidden agendas, where the truth was a commodity more valuable and far more deadly than any technology. The weight of the realization settled heavily in the quiet Santa Monica safe house, a dense, oppressive thing that felt more substantial than the silence itself. The fire was no accident. The words hung unspoken between Ethan and Olivia, but the truth resonated in the taut lines of his jaw, the sharpened focus in his eyes, and the sudden, cold dread that gripped her. Olivia, despite the lingering fog of amnesia, felt a chilling clarity. Her father's business, built on generations of ruthless deals, was now threatening to consume her. They didn't just want the yachts gone, Ethan murmured, his gaze distant, sifting through the reports he'd quietly gathered. They wanted whatever was on them, whatever evidence your father was trying to secure. Olivia clutched a mug of lukewarm herbal tea, her fingers tracing patterns on its ceramic surface. The fragmented memory of the argument with her father intensified, a desperate, heated exchange about something vital, something that had to be protected. He was paranoid, she whispered, her voice raw, about the defense contract. He said it was compromised, that a collapse would expose everything, not just the deal, but years of financial engineering. He sounded terrified, which was unlike him. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing, connecting the dots. The official story gives them cover. No foul play, no deep dive into the Reed Corporation's books. He looked at her, his expression grim. They're not just trying to bury evidence. They're trying to bury you, if you remember too much, or if you start asking questions. A shiver ran down Olivia's spine. The casual threat in his voice wasn't meant to frighten her, but to ground her in the brutal reality of their situation. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The heiress, accustomed to delegating, to having an army of professionals at her disposal, now found herself utterly reliant on this quiet, damaged man. And surprisingly, she felt safer than she had in years. "We find out who they are," Ethan stated, his plan already forming, and what they were trying to hide. His own past, the shadows of missions gone wrong, the crushing burden of failure, had taught him one thing: when the official channels closed, you forged your own. He reached for his phone, an old brick-like model that most people had abandoned years ago. "I know some people who operate in the grey, who might have heard whispers." Their investigation began in earnest, a clandestine operation conducted from the unassuming Santa Monica bungalow. Ethan worked his network, a collection of former military intelligence operatives, retired law enforcement officers, and a few ethical hackers he'd encountered over his career. These weren't men who worked for money alone. They were loyal to a code, a sense of justice that transcended legalities. Olivia, meanwhile, became an information conduit, a walking encyclopedia of Reed technologies. Even without her memories of the explosion, her sharp intellect was a formidable weapon. She navigated the labyrinthine corporate structures from a borrowed laptop, searching for anomalies. "My father was extremely meticulous," she explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Every penny, every contract, every communication. If something was amiss, he'd have left a trail, or someone would have tried to erase it." The initial responses from Ethan's contacts were lukewarm. The Reed Corporation was a behemoth, its influence stretching across legal, political, and financial sectors. Touching it meant inviting serious trouble. But one contact, a retired FBI analyst named Silas, a man with a penchant for cryptic messages and an encyclopedic memory for corporate malfeasance, gave Ethan a lead. "Barty Hayes," Silas's gravelly voice crackled over the secure line. "He wasn't just your father's head of security, Olivia. He was former special ops, a ghost. And he disappeared too cleanly. That's not a man who vanishes without leaving a digital footprint or a very specific message." Silas's voice dropped, becoming a low warning. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to make him disappear, and to keep his mouth shut." Olivia's search through the company's internal servers, initially fruitless, slowly began to yield faint echoes of irregularities. Financial transfers to shell companies, unusually large expenditures on maritime security upgrades for the Odyssey and Serenity that didn't match known invoices, and a flurry of encrypted communications between her father and a handful of senior executives in the weeks leading up to the disaster. One name in particular kept resurfacing in the peripheral data: Marcus Croft. He was Richard Reed's trusted business partner, a man of impeccable reputation, known for his shrewdness and his unwavering loyalty to the Reed empire. The sheer frequency of his communication with Richard, though mundane on the surface, struck Olivia as odd. Croft was a silent partner, handling high-level strategy, not day-to-day operations. "Croft," Ethan's brow furrowed. "He's practically family, isn't he? Been with your father for decades." "Exactly," Olivia replied, a knot forming in her stomach. "He's beyond reproach, but the volume of communication, it's disproportionate to his usual involvement." She zoomed in on a data packet, a highly encrypted message from Croft to her father, dated just 2 days before the explosion. It was unreadable, a wall of garbled characters, but its existence suggested a deeper, more urgent exchange than public records indicated. Their clandestine work was not unnoticed. The first warning came subtly, almost dismissively, a whisper of a consequence for their unauthorized inquiries. One afternoon, as Ethan was returning from a quick supply run, he noticed a faint, metallic scent in his old Ford pickup, a smell he knew all too well from his military days: fresh hydraulic fluid. He pulled over, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, and checked the brake lines. A clean cut. Not a rupture, not corrosion, but a deliberate surgical severance, just enough to function for a while, then fail catastrophically at speed. He stared at the gleaming, precise cut, a cold fury rising within him. This wasn't some random act of vandalism. This was a message, a very clear, very deadly one. He returned to the safe house, his face grim, and explained the situation to Olivia. "They're watching us, and they're not playing games." The incident shattered the last vestiges of normalcy that had clung to Olivia. This wasn't just corporate espionage or a financial scandal. It was an active threat to their lives. Yet, instead of succumbing to fear, a steely resolve settled in her eyes. "We need to move faster," she said, her voice firm. "If they're willing to do this, they're desperate." The rigged car was merely the first volley. A few nights later, Ethan, needing to consult with a contact in person, ventured out alone into the labyrinthine alleys of Venice Beach. The air hung heavy with the scent of salt and marijuana, the distant sound of drum circles and street performers, a stark contrast to the silence that suddenly enveloped him. He felt it before he saw it, the subtle shift in the air pressure, the faint scraping of a shoe on concrete behind him. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, moving with the trained, predatory grace of someone who meant to kill. Ethan, his senses hyper-alert, spun on his heel, his SEAL training kicking in with a violent, primal roar. He moved with brutal efficiency, anticipating, blocking, striking. The figure was skilled, fast, wielding a slim, wickedly sharp blade. Every parry, every dodge, every counterattack was a dance of death. Ethan felt the familiar adrenaline surge, the world narrowing to a series of movements, breath, and the glint of steel. He managed to disarm his assailant, sending the blade skittering across the grimy pavement. The figure, seeing the opportunity vanish, melted back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Ethan with a scraped cheek, a bruised arm, and a renewed understanding of the forces they were up against. These weren't petty thugs. They were professionals, trained and ruthless. He returned to Olivia, his shirt torn, a thin line of blood tracing his jaw. He didn't have to say anything. The look in his eyes, the scent of fear and adrenaline clinging to him, spoke volumes. Olivia, her face pale, handed him a first aid kit. As she carefully cleaned his wounds, their hands brushed, a jolt of unspoken connection passing between them. The shared danger was forging an unbreakable bond, a profound, undeniable reliance that transcended words. In the crucible of fear and desperation, their individual strengths were merging into a singular, formidable force. He protected her physically, a silent, deadly shield. She protected them intellectually, her sharp mind slicing through layers of corporate deception. "I found something," Olivia said, her voice hushed, her gaze intense. "An encrypted server, deeply nested within Reed Technologies' old architecture. It's almost impossible to find unless you know what you're looking for. It's not just a server, Ethan. It's a dead man's switch. My father's private vault." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a complex series of commands flashing across the screen. He must have prepared it, knowing he was in deep trouble. "I found a reference to it in some old deleted emails, a coded message from Barty Hayes. It mentions a digital ledger and a Croft's shadow." "Croft," Ethan repeated, the name now chilling him to the bone. "Silas mentioned something similar. Rumors of his ambition, quiet resentments against your father, going back years. Everyone assumed it was healthy competition, but what if it was something darker? The dead man's switch. It explained everything. Her father hadn't just been entangled, he had been fighting back. He had been gathering evidence to expose the very person who now sought to bury him. The full, horrifying truth began to coalesce, a sickening realization that turned Olivia's stomach. Marcus Croft, Richard Reed's seemingly trusted and ruthlessly ambitious business partner, the man who had been a constant, benign presence throughout Olivia's life, was the architect of this intricate web of deceit. He had orchestrated the fire, not just to destroy the incriminating data, but to frame Richard Reed for the massive financial fraud, to ensure he would be blamed for the collapse of the defense contract, and to clear his own path to seize absolute control of the Reed empire. The missing security footage, the accelerants, Barty Hayes' disappearance, it all pointed to Croft, meticulously planning, executing, and covering his tracks. "He framed my father," Olivia whispered, the words catching in her throat raw with a mix of grief and betrayal. The amnesia no longer felt like a blank space, but a protective barrier, keeping the full horror of that last argument at bay. "He killed those people, and he tried to kill me." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of silent support, his touch firm and grounding. "He won't get away with it. We're getting closer to that ledger, that dead man's switch. It holds the proof." He saw the shift in her, the heiress giving way to the warrior, her intellect now fully engaged in the fight. The game had changed. They were no longer just seeking answers, they were hunting a predator, and the predator, sensing their proximity, was about to strike again, harder, and with even greater precision. They needed that data, that irrefutable proof, before Croft could finish what he started and silence them forever. The digital ledger, a hidden data drive secured by Olivia's father as a desperate measure, became their sole focus. It was their key, their weapon, their only hope against Marcus Croft's insidious network. Olivia, her mind a steel trap of logic and intuition, worked tirelessly, her fingers a blur over the keyboard, navigating the labyrinthine cyber defenses Richard Reed had built. Ethan, a silent sentinel, watched her, his presence a constant anchor, his training preparing him for the inevitable storm. The small Santa Monica safe house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a war room, charged with a desperate, growing tension. "He anticipated this," Olivia murmured, her voice tight with concentration as she bypassed another layer of encryption. "My father, he knew he was walking a tightrope. This isn't just a simple server, it's a digital fortress built to withstand an assault. It's like he was preparing for a siege." Ethan nodded, remembering the quiet desperation in Olivia's voice when she spoke of her father's paranoia. "He was trying to protect himself, and now he's trying to protect you." He moved around the small space, checking the windows, scanning the quiet street, a lifetime of vigilance ingrained in his every move. The close calls, the sabotaged car, the shadowy assassin in Venice, were not random acts. They were precise, calculated attempts to neutralize them. Croft was tightening the net. Hours bled into days, fueled by stale coffee and a shared, unspoken determination. Olivia's amnesia, once a frustrating void, now served as a twisted blessing, forcing her to approach the problem with pure logic, unburdened by the emotional weight of memory. She was an architect of code, dissecting her father's defenses with surgical precision. Each successful bypass was a small victory, a tiny crack in Croft's carefully constructed facade. Then she found it. Not the ledger itself, but a hidden, recursive loop, a digital tripwire designed to alert Richard Reed if anyone attempted to access his private vault without his specific biometric key. This loop, however, contained a secondary passive function. It mirrored a fragment of its contents, a single, highly encrypted file, to a defunct, public-facing server that her father had used for testing purposes years ago. It was a fail-safe within a fail-safe, a desperate measure designed for a scenario exactly like this. He must have set it to trickle feed, Olivia explained, her eyes wide with sudden realization. Her slow, almost imperceptible data transfer, meant to activate only if the primary vault was compromised, or if he didn't access it within a certain time frame. Like a digital dead man's trigger, but delayed. The file was small, maddeningly so, but its existence confirmed their suspicions. It contained not the full ledger, but a meticulously detailed, irrefutable proof of a massive financial fraud, systematically siphoning hundreds of millions of dollars from the defense contract and funneling it into offshore accounts. The architect of this intricate web of deceit, as they had suspected, was Marcus Croft. But the file also contained a chilling revelation. Croft hadn't acted alone. He had a network, a small, tightly knit group of operatives, including a man named Barty Hayes, the missing head of security, and a shadowy figure referred to only as the Enforcer, the same professional assassin who had attacked Ethan in Venice. "This is it," Ethan breathed, staring at the screen, the weight of the evidence pressing down on him. "This proves everything. Croft orchestrated the fire to destroy the primary data, to frame your father, and to clean house of anyone who might talk." Just as the enormity of their discovery settled over them, the air in the safe house shifted. A subtle, almost imperceptible change, but Ethan felt it. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. The quiet hum of the street outside seemed to fade, replaced by a growing, unnerving silence. He moved instantly, pulling Olivia away from the laptop, pushing her behind a heavy, reinforced door. "They found us," he stated, his voice low and guttural. "Get ready." A deafening crash erupted from the front of the house as the main door splintered inward. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moved through the small living room. These weren't petty criminals. These were professionals, moving with a disciplined precision that spoke of military training. Ethan drew a compact, custom-made knife from a sheath hidden on his ankle, its steel glinting in the dim light. He had abandoned firearms after his last mission, but he was a master of close-quarters combat, his body a finely tuned instrument of destruction. A figure, lean and powerful, entered the room, his eyes scanning the shadows with chilling efficiency. This was the Enforcer, the same man from Venice. He moved with a silent, deadly grace, a phantom in the flickering light. Ethan met his gaze, a silent challenge passing between them, the primal recognition of two apex predators. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "I know what you are." The Enforcer's voice was a low growl, devoid of emotion. "And what she is. You've gone too far." Before the Enforcer could react, Ethan lunged, a whirlwind of calculated fury. The fight was brutal, a desperate, visceral struggle for survival. Ethan moved with the fluidity of a dancer, the force of a battering ram, blocking punches, delivering precise strikes. The Enforcer was relentless, his attacks focused and powerful, aiming to disable, to kill. They moved like shadows, blurring into the cramped space, furniture crashing, glass shattering. Ethan felt a searing pain as the assassin's blade grazed his arm, a grim reminder of the stakes. But Ethan was fighting for more than just his life. He was fighting for Olivia, for justice, for a chance at redemption. Meanwhile, Olivia, huddled behind the reinforced door, was not idle. Her mind, racing a mile a minute, processed the information she had just uncovered. Croft, Barty Hayes, the defense contract, the full scope of the fraud. She had the fragment of the ledger, but it was just that, a fragment. The complete picture, the full digital ledger, was still within the dead man's switch, protected by her father's biometric lock, and they needed it to expose Croft fully. She realized, with a sudden, devastating clarity, that the argument she had with her father, the one that had been lost to amnesia, was crucial. It wasn't just about the contract, It was about the security of the ledger. She was missing a piece of the puzzle, a memory that held the key. A sudden violent crash brought her back to the immediate danger. The safe house was being systematically dismantled. Ethan was holding his own, but he was outnumbered. Two more figures had entered, moving with the same trained efficiency, circling Ethan, trying to flank him. The clang of metal, the grunt of effort, the sharp crack of bone, the sounds were terrifyingly real. Olivia, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, knew she had to act. She couldn't fight them physically, but she could fight them with her mind. She pulled out her own discreet burner phone, a device she had used for secure communications with Ethan's network. She knew her father's system intimately. There had to be a backdoor, a secondary authentication, something she was missing. The argument, it had revolved around a specific, seemingly insignificant detail about the old security protocols for his personal devices. A phrase, a sequence, something he had obsessively drilled into her as a child, a mnemonic for remembering complex encryption keys. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember, to push past the wall of amnesia. The sounds of the fight outside grew louder, more desperate. Ethan was yelling something, a warning. She saw flashes of it in her mind. Her father's stern face, his voice impatient, frustrated. Always verify the secondary sequence, Olivia. The true key isn't the first thing you see. It's the hidden pattern, the echo. The echo. The phrase triggered something. Her father had often used obscure literary references in his security protocols. An echo, a hidden pattern. She typed a string of characters into the burner phone, a combination of a forgotten poem and a specific date. A date significant only to her father. The phone buzzed. A single word appeared on the screen. Access granted. It was a backdoor into the dead man's switch, a secondary access portal her father had created as a contingency, but it was limited. She could only access one specific file, one that he must have designated as the absolute failsafe, the ultimate proof. She didn't have time for the full ledger. She had to choose. She instinctively went for the most damning evidence she could think of, the one thing that would connect Croft directly to the fire, beyond mere financial fraud. The yacht schematics, the compromised safety protocols, the direct evidence of sabotage. Just as the file began to download, the reinforced door buckled. The enforcer, having briefly incapacitated Ethan, now turned his attention to Olivia, a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. He raised his hand, a heavy, bladed object glinting in his grip. This was it. The download was only halfway complete. Ethan, battered and bleeding, let out a primal roar, pushing through the pain, his eyes fixed on Olivia. He launched himself forward, intercepting the enforcer, taking the brunt of the attack. They crashed through the remaining furniture, a desperate struggle that brought them dangerously close to the now exposed server rack. Olivia, her heart pounding in her ears, watched the download progress, a tiny green bar inching agonizingly slowly across her phone screen. Ethan was buying her time, sacrificing himself. She saw the grim determination on his face, the raw, unyielding will to protect her. The unspoken reliance between them, forged in fire and shared danger, deepened into something profound, something unbreakable. It was an affection that had blossomed unexpectedly amidst the ashes of her burning empire. The download completed. Just as the enforcer gained the upper hand, his arm raised for a killing blow, Olivia screamed, a sound filled with fury and despair. "I have it! I have the proof!" The enforcer paused, his gaze flicking to the phone in her hand, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. It was a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Ethan, seizing the opportunity, delivered a powerful, bone-jarring blow, sending the enforcer sprawling. The other two operatives, seeing their leader momentarily incapacitated and hearing Olivia's desperate declaration, hesitated, their movements faltering. The safe house, now a battlefield, resonated with their ragged breathing, the shattered furniture, and the lingering scent of fear and smoke. They had the proof, but they were still trapped, and Croft, they knew, would not stop, not until they were silenced forever. They needed a plan, and they needed to move. Fast. The battle for the truth had just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. They had survived, but the fight was far from over. The exposed server rack, flickering with lights, seemed to hum with the stolen data, a silent witness to their perilous victory. The small Santa Monica safe house was a wreck. Furniture lay splintered, glass shards glittered ominously on the floor, and the air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the lingering scent of fear. Ethan, bruised and bleeding but alive, helped Olivia to her feet. The enforcer and his two operatives, momentarily disoriented by Ethan's final desperate counterattack and Olivia's declaration, had retreated into the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but also a vital window of opportunity. "They know we have something," Olivia said, her voice trembling slightly, but her eyes burning with a fierce resolve. She clutched the burner phone, the data drive's critical fragment now secured within it. "And they won't stop until they get it, or us." Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping over the ravaged room, calculating their next move. "We can't stay here. This place is compromised. We need to go public, and we need to do it somewhere he can't stop us." His mind raced, pulling from years of tactical training, weighing options, risks, and the unpredictable nature of their enemy. Croft would be furious, desperate, and dangerous. They had poked the beast, and it would retaliate with brutal force. "The gala," Olivia suddenly interjected, a spark of insight igniting her features. "The Reed Corporation's annual Founders Gala. It's tonight, at the downtown headquarters. 50 stories of glass and steel. Every major player in the city, every media outlet, every investor will be there. Croft will be there, reveling in his perceived victory. It's the perfect stage." Ethan looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. It was a bold, almost suicidal plan, but it was also brilliant. They had leveraged Croft's hubris against him, turning his moment of triumph into his downfall. "High risk, high reward," he murmured. "But it's also a fortress. Security will be impenetrable. How do we get in, and how do we broadcast it to the world?" Olivia's lips curled into a faint, defiant smile. "My father built that fortress, but I know its weaknesses. Every system, every protocol, every back door, it's in my blood. And as for broadcasting," she held up the burner phone, "this contains enough information to shatter his carefully constructed image. But we need more. We need to access the main network, the full data flow from my father's original dead man's switch, to make sure it's irrefutable, undeniable. We need to do it from the inside." Their plan was audacious, bordering on insane. They would infiltrate the most secure building in Los Angeles, confront Marcus Croft at his moment of triumph, and expose his crimes live to the world. They spent the next few hours in a whirlwind of frantic preparation, a strange mix of high-tech espionage and old-school tactical planning. Ethan contacted Silas, his retired FBI contact, giving him a coded warning, a heads-up that a major story was about to break. He also reached out to a few of his more trustworthy, off-the-books contacts, requesting diversions, creating a web of confusion that would pull Croft's resources thin. Olivia, meanwhile, downloaded encrypted schematics of the Reed Corporation building, identifying weak points in the security, ventilation shafts, and redundant network access points. They acquired appropriate attire, a sleek, dark gown for Olivia, a tailored suit for Ethan, sourced quickly and discreetly from an anonymous thrift store, a stark contrast to their usual practical wear. They looked like any other power couple attending a high society event, but beneath the veneer, they were an armed, desperate force, preparing for battle. The tarnished silver compass charm on Ethan's neck felt heavier than usual, a silent reminder of the path he was now on, a path directly into the fire. As dusk began to paint the Los Angeles skyline, they made their way towards the gleaming 50-story downtown headquarters of the Reed Corporation, a fortress of glass and steel that pierced the heavens. The building, usually a beacon of corporate power, was now alight with thousands of tiny, sparkling lights, a testament to the lavish gala unfolding within. Limousines lined the streets, disgorging a stream of the city's elite, their laughter and chatter a distant, muffled hum. Their entry was a carefully orchestrated ballet of deception and timing. Ethan created a diversion at a side entrance, a minor security alert that drew attention away from Olivia. While guards converged on the false alarm, Olivia, using her intimate knowledge of the building's less-used service entrances, slipped inside, a ghost in the gleaming hallways. She navigated the labyrinthine back passages, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the echoes of her father's voice, his meticulous instructions, guiding her through the intricate blueprint of his empire. She found a rarely used network access panel in a deserted server maintenance room on the third floor, a forgotten relic of an older system, but still connected to the main grid. She plugged in, a silent prayer forming on her lips, and began the arduous process of establishing a direct link to the central network. She needed to access the projection systems for the ballroom, systems designed for corporate presentations, not for exposing corporate malfeasance. Meanwhile, Ethan, having dispatched the diversion, made his way to the main ballroom, his senses on high alert. The room was a shimmering spectacle of wealth and power, crystal chandeliers casting a dazzling light on hundreds of impeccably dressed guests. Marcus Croft stood at the center of it all, a vision of polished composure, his face radiating an aura of quiet triumph. He was accepting accolades, shaking hands, the undisputed new king of the Reed Empire, his smile betraying no hint of the monstrous betrayal that had brought him to this pinnacle. Olivia's voice, a low whisper in Ethan's earpiece, a discreet communication device they had acquired, confirmed her progress. "I'm in. I've established a backdoor. I can tap into the projection screens. Just give me the signal." Ethan spotted Olivia across the crowded ballroom, her dark gown a striking contrast to the opulent setting. Her gaze met his, a silent communication passing between them. He nodded imperceptibly. It was time. He started to make his way through the throng, moving with a controlled urgency towards Croft, who was now holding court near the main stage, basking in the glow of his false victory. As Ethan approached, Croft's private security detail, a group of burly ex-military operatives, the same ruthless men who had attacked the safe house, subtly shifted, forming a protective cordon around their employer. They recognized Ethan instantly. Their eyes narrowed, their hands subtly moving towards concealed weapons. The air around Croft grew thick with unspoken menace. "Marcus Croft," Ethan's voice cut through the polite murmur of the crowd, clear and steady, drawing immediate attention. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Croft's. Croft turned, his practiced smile faltering slightly as he recognized Ethan. A flicker of annoyance, then suspicion, crossed his features. "I'm afraid I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said, his voice smooth but with an underlying edge of steel. He subtly signaled his security detail, who began to converge on Ethan. "No, we haven't," Ethan replied, his gaze unwavering. "But Olivia has some information she believes the world should hear." At that precise moment, Olivia stepped forward, emerging from the crowd, her face a mask of controlled fury, the small burner phone held aloft like a sacred artifact. "Marcus, it's over," she declared, her voice resonating through the ballroom, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the guests. "Your lies end tonight." Croft's polished facade cracked. A vein pulsed visibly in his temple. He dismissed Olivia's claims with a chilling composure, attempting to paint her as unstable, a grieving daughter lashing out in her sorrow. "Olivia, my dear, I understand your pain, but this is hardly the time or place for such delusions." His security detail moved in, ready to escort both Ethan and Olivia out. "It's not delusion, Marcus," Olivia retorted, her voice gaining strength, tinged with a devastating conviction. "It's the truth, and my father made sure there was a way to expose it." She met Ethan's gaze, a silent signal passing between them. This was it, the moment of truth. Ethan launched himself into action, neutralizing Croft's private security detail with brutal, precise efficiency. His SEAL training, honed in countless real-world conflicts, erupted with a controlled ferocity. Punches connected with sickening thuds, bodies crumpled, and a stunned silence fell over the elegant gala as the veneer of civility shattered. The assembled elite watched in horrified fascination as the fight broke out amidst the glittering splendor. This was not a corporate squabble. It was a violent, desperate confrontation. Amidst the chaos, Olivia, with a brilliant, audacious move, bypassed the building's internal security. Her fingers flew across the burner phone, sending a cascade of commands through the network, leveraging her unparalleled knowledge of the company's intricate systems. On the massive projection screens, meant to display corporate achievements and market projections, the images suddenly flickered, then resolved into a stream of data. It was the undeniable truth of Croft's fraud. Meticulously detailed financial records flashed across the screens, showing systematic siphoning of hundreds of millions of dollars into offshore accounts. Then came the chilling schematics, detailing how he manipulated financial records, compromised the yacht's safety protocols to ensure the accident appeared convincing, and systematically framed her father for the colossal fraud. The images, the data, the irrefutable evidence played out live, not just for the gala attendees but for the entire world. News crews, alerted by Silas, had already patched into the building's external feeds, broadcasting the shocking exposé live on national news. The gala erupted into utter chaos. Gasps, shouts, the clamor of camera shutters, and the frantic whispers of bewildered guests filled the ballroom. Croft, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him, his carefully constructed persona shattering into dust before the eyes of the world. His betrayal, his greed, his monstrous acts were laid bare. The truth, like a tidal wave, washed over the glittering crowd, drowning his carefully constructed lies in a sea of undeniable evidence. Ethan, having incapacitated the last of Croft's security, now stood guard beside Olivia, his body aching but his eyes alight with a fierce satisfaction. The battle was won. The truth had found its voice, but the consequences, they knew, were just beginning. The 5 chapters had led to this point, a devastating reveal, an emotionally devastating confrontation that changed everything. The Reed Corporation's gleaming 50-story headquarters, a beacon of power and prestige, had been transformed into a scene of utter pandemonium. The live broadcast of Marcus Croft's meticulously orchestrated fraud, projected onto the massive screens for the entire world to witness, had shattered the illusion of corporate integrity. Guests, once captivated by the opulent affair, now scrambled in a frantic disarray, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and bewildered comprehension. The air crackled with the clamor of camera crews, reporters shouting questions, and the shrill blare of police sirens converging on the scene. Marcus Croft, his face a contorted mask of fury and disbelief, was swiftly apprehended amidst the chaos. His carefully constructed criminal enterprise, built on decades of deceit and fueled by a deep-seated resentment against the Reed family, crumbled around him. The elegant ballroom, meant to be the stage for his ultimate triumph, became the arena of his public downfall. He was led away in handcuffs, his once impeccable suit now disheveled, his eyes still burning with a cold, desperate rage, a defeated king stripped of his crown. Ethan, his body aching from the brutal confrontation, watched with a grim satisfaction as Croft was escorted out. His own shirt was torn, his face streaked with dirt and blood, but a profound sense of purpose, long dormant, had reignited within him. Olivia stood beside him, her initial trembling now replaced by a quiet, formidable strength. The burner phone, its screen still displaying the damning evidence, felt heavy in her hand. The truth, once a terrifying secret, was now a public spectacle, irreversible and undeniable. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of interrogations, official statements, and the relentless flash of paparazzi cameras. Ethan and Olivia, despite their exhaustion, navigated the maelstrom with a newfound symbiotic efficiency. Ethan, with his military background and innate tactical sense, ensured their privacy and security, deftly deflecting intrusive questions. Olivia, her mind still reeling from the emotional devastation of Croft's betrayal, provided the crucial technical details, articulating the intricate web of financial fraud and corporate malfeasance with chilling clarity. The shocking revelation of Croft's treachery sent shockwaves far beyond the gala. The defense contract, the source of so much tension and ultimately so much destruction, was immediately suspended. Investigations were launched, not just into Croft, but into every corner of his network, every shell company, every offshore account. The public, initially drawn in by the sensationalism of the burning yachts and the glamorous gala, was now gripped by the sheer scale of the deception, the betrayal that had reached the highest echelons of power. Amidst the unfolding drama, one question lingered, a quiet, aching query in Olivia's mind. Her father, Richard Reed, the formidable patriarch, had been on the Serenity, the second yacht. For days his fate had been unknown, presumed lost in the inferno. But the truth, as it often did, eventually surfaced. Richard Reed, it was revealed, had indeed been on the second yacht, narrowly escaping the flames thanks to his personal security detail, who had managed to get him to a hidden lifeboat just before the vessel was completely engulfed. He had suffered severe burns and smoke inhalation, and was now recovering in a discreet, highly secured medical facility, far from the public eye. The news was a profound relief. a wave of bittersweet emotion washing over Olivia. Her father was alive, but the betrayal, the knowledge that his trusted partner had orchestrated such a heinous plot, had taken its toll. He was not just physically scarred, the emotional wounds ran deeper. Publicly, Richard Reed was fully cleared of all wrongdoing, his name vindicated, his role in uncovering Croft's fraud highlighted. The media, initially eager to paint him as complicit, now hailed him as a victim, a man who, despite his ruthless business practices, had ultimately tried to do the right thing. However, the experience had transformed Richard. The brush with death, the searing betrayal, the public humiliation of his empire's near collapse had forced a profound introspection. He announced his decision to step down from the direct management of Reed Technologies, seeking solace and time for introspection, a quiet retreat from the cutthroat world he had once dominated. He left the future of the company in Olivia's hands, a silent testament to his newfound trust in her capabilities, a trust forged in the crucible of fire and betrayal. Olivia, now standing outside her father's long shadow, felt a new sense of purpose bloom within her. The company she had once viewed as a suffocating burden now felt like a living entity, an opportunity for true transformation. She vowed to rebuild Reed Technologies from the ground up, to forge a new legacy built on unwavering ethical foundations, transparency, and genuine technological innovation, not ruthless ambition. It would be a monumental task, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly in control, her intellect and spirit aligned with a clear, moral compass. And then there was Ethan. He had not returned to a life of quiet anonymity, of wrenching and solitude. The fight for justice, the protection of Olivia, had reignited a fire within him, a sense of purpose he thought long extinguished. He had shed the heavy burdens of his past failures, not by forgetting them, but by embracing a new mission. He accepted Olivia's offer, not as an obligation, but as a calling. He would head a new specialized security and ethics initiative within Reed Technologies, ensuring the company's future integrity, protecting against internal threats, and safeguarding its new ethical direction. It was a role that leveraged his unique skills, his tactical mind, and his unwavering moral code. Their bond, forged in the consuming fire of betrayal and danger, had deepened into an unbreakable partnership, a relationship built on absolute trust, mutual respect, and an undeniable affection that had blossomed unexpectedly amidst the ashes of a burning empire. It wasn't a conventional romance, not yet, but something far more profound, a connection born of shared trauma and unwavering loyalty. They were two damaged souls, each finding in the other a sense of completeness, a future where hope could thrive. The final scene depicts Ethan and Olivia standing together at a revitalized Marina del Rey. The sun, once again, bled crimson and gold across the tranquil waters, mirroring the healing that had begun. Two new yachts, smaller, sleeker, and built with uncompromising safety standards, were docked where the Odyssey and Serenity had once stood. They were not monuments to opulent excess, but symbols of a new beginning, of lessons learned and a future redefined. The scars of the past, both visible and invisible, lingered. Ethan still carried the weight of his losses, but his eyes held a new light, a quiet strength that had replaced the former resignation. Olivia, too, bore the emotional scars of betrayal and the trauma of the fire, but her gaze was resolute, her spirit unbroken. The horizon before them was clear, promising a future redefined by courage, truth, and the unlikely love that bloomed where only destruction was meant to thrive. The gentle lapping of the waves, the distant hum of activity, the soft glow of the setting sun. It was a symphony of peace, earned through unimaginable hardship, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of hope. They stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to face whatever lay ahead, together. In the quiet strength of shared purpose, Ethan and Olivia discovered that some fires don't destroy, they purify, they transform, they forge unbreakable bonds and illuminate new paths, reminding us that even from the deepest ashes, hope can rise, more brilliant and resilient than ever before. It's a testament to the quiet heroes among us, those who, when faced with overwhelming darkness, choose to light a path forward, proving that courage, integrity, and genuine connection can indeed redefine a future. Share this story if you believe in the power of truth to overcome even the most insidious betrayals. Like and subscribe to Join us in celebrating stories of transformation and the human spirit's unwavering capacity for renewal. Remember, every sunset holds the promise of a new dawn, and every challenge is an opportunity for profound change.